Our founders created the United States of America. The name is important because they believed the states needed to be strong enough to protect citizens from an overreaching federal government. That healthy skepticism toward federal power has been validated frequently ever since Benjamin Franklin explained the Constitutional Convention created a republic, if we can keep it. The Constitution created a system of checks and balances, not just between branches of the federal government, but between the states and citizens as well. The Constitution created a fundamental balance of both direct and indirect representation within the federal government. The people elected the House of Representatives. State legislators elected senators. By having state legislators elect senators, the Constitution made certain that our senators were responsive to the needs of the states, which helped ensure the sovereignty of the states. This meant that during America's first 124 years, the states could influence the federal budget. They also had the power to control federal debt and deficits, prevent unfunded mandates from being imposed, and restrain overreach by federal agencies. As designed, the states could even keep special interests out of the relationship between the states and Washington, D.C. But today, the states seem powerless against the federal government and the corrupting power of special interests. So what happened to the founders' vision? About 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, President Woodrow Wilson pushed for the ratification of the 17th Amendment, ending the founders' vision of having our state legislators elect 2 senators from each state. He was helped by populist Democrats, the Hearst media empire, and the progressive movement of the era. Proponents argued the 17th Amendment would prevent deadlocks in state legislatures during Senate races, which would deprive a state of its representation in federal government. It also argued that the 17th Amendment would prevent corruption, because the legislators were currently under risk of being bribed by candidates for election. The 17th Amendment did away with the states electing senators, and by doing so, it gave Washington, D.C. more power than our founders ever imagined. The 17th Amendment also failed to prevent corruption. Instead, it created the environment where corruption could flourish. Today, a winning Senate campaign needs to raise almost $11 million. That means every day of every week, our senators need to raise $15,000. And on average, senators spend 25 hours a week fundraising. And when they're in Washington, D.C., they're fundraising in Washington, D.C. That means they're less responsive to the needs of their states and more aligned with Washington's special interests. That also means the states are being left out of national politics because they're now powerless to influence legislation in Congress. This is why we've seen out-of-control spending in Washington, unfunded mandates forced upon the states. And this is how unelected bureaucrats have the power to write regulations telling states what they can and cannot do. We've had more than 100 years of experience with the 17th Amendment, and the states have experienced the unintended consequences that have impacted their sovereignty, their state budgets, and their ability to control the federal government. Just like the 18th Amendment was repealed when the country realized what a big mistake prohibition was, we need to repeal the 17th Amendment because we need to take money and power away from the federal government and return it to the states. The genius of our founders' original design of the Constitution has once again been proven. Vote to restore the original design, take the money and corruption out of senatorial races, and reestablish checks and balances between sovereign states and the federal government. Vote for the resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment.